The girl was lying on the floor near a warm fireplace that gave off a bright light, but she was still shivering from the cold. But then suddenly she heard someone calling her name. A man's voice kept calling Selina's name. The girl immediately woke up and sat on the floor. But at that moment a man came in and asked her why she was sprawled out here. It was Selina's father, and he shouted at her and asked, "Can't she get up? His Highness ordered her to come to the palace, and the girl should hurry up and also start packing already." Universe, who was still a little sleepy, was surprised that His Highness was calling. But her father was angry that Selene had asked, and said that she had just heard everything perfectly well herself, hadn't she? So why ask again? He also added that she shouldn't even think about not going to the event. Selina replied that it wasn't that at all. It was just that this ritual had been more difficult than the previous one, and she was still a little sick from it. But her father interrupted her and said he wasn't interested in excuses. When he was about to leave, he told her that if a girl didn't want him to drag her by the hair like he did when she was a kid, then she should get up right now and start getting ready and dressed accordingly. And didn't even think about embarrassing their family. She has to make everything perfect. At that moment, an assistant came into her room. She gave Selina's father a glance, and afterward Anna turned to the girl herself, asking if she was very tired. She also offered to help dress in hanbok. A hanbok is a garment for formal and semi-formal receptions, festivals, and celebrations. Selina thought for a while, but then agreed after all. And as Anna helped her dress, she said that Selina had mentioned that the creatures were feeling heavier at the moment than before. The girl agreed with her, and she thought that this winter especially, it was harder for her. The ice wall wanted more energy. She certainly thought she would succeed this time, but her expectations were not met. Anna asked, "After all, the ritual represents the use of the blessing of the goddess of ice? It is what keeps the ice wall, located in the north of the kingdom, from collapsing." And she wondered what lay beyond it. The universe replied that no one knows. But one thing is certain: if the ice wall collapses, a great catastrophe will befall the kingdom. It's supposed to be just an errand to stick to. She said it must be hard to maintain that huge wall of ice every winter. Selene smiled and said that nevertheless, through this power, the Stuart family had received a powerful blessing. Anna was a little upset when she heard this, but she didn't say anything back. At that moment she remembered the conversations of the other maids. The girls didn't understand what was so difficult about it, considering what she could enjoy. Thanks to this ability, she should work harder after all, they said of Selene. Anna thought at this point that there really wasn't anything she liked about this ability. She turned to Selene a while later and asked why she didn't tell His Highness that she was coming to see him next time. She also added that she would really like to see Madame get some rest at least. The universe said no and said they couldn't. If he'd called them, there must be a reason. But at that moment, she wondered, didn't he know they had a ritual that day? Sometime later, Anna added that she remembered that he had invited the Duke of Millard there too. Selina, hearing this, immediately turned around like a maid and interjected, "Is it really Millard?" Anna said that it seemed that His Highness Leandro and Duke Millard had known her for a long time. They were at the academy together. At this point, Mistress thought that this was the reason why so many people misunderstood them. They have never been the best friends that others think they are, especially since Leandro knows full well that he and Millard don't get along at all. And at that moment, the girl remembered the last time they had all been together. Leandro had said that after this graduation, unless something very bad happened to the kingdom, he'd never call the two of them to the same place, or they'd tear each other's throats out. Then finally the guy offered to pray for the three of us to never meet in the same place again. Selina was ready, and she thought that after that statement he hadn't invited them together for a year. She still can't believe it, that he called the two of them to the same place, and that can only mean one thing, that Sebastian's kingdom is in danger. At this time at Leandro Manor, Millard asked if Selene was coming. The landlord replied that yes, he thought she would be here soon too. At that moment, he picked up his cup of tea. Millard then became indignant, and replied that it seemed like a year ago he had said they would never get together. The man was surprised, and said that he didn't know they were counting the days. He also added that he can't believe Lord Millard cares so much about Selina. Always wondered after graduation what would happen if the two of them met again. At the black-haired guy, who just so happened to be Millard, asked that he not say such scary things. Then Leandro laughed and said that he was, after all, a duke who could not be embarrassed, but apparently he had succeeded, and it's just impossible not to find it amusing, the way his emotions revealed themselves at the mere mention of Selena. He also added, asking if he hadn't told him after graduation to call them both in a serious situation. Millard was very surprised to hear this. But at that moment, one of the workers at Leandro's house knocked on the door and told His Highness that Mrs. Selena Stewart had arrived. And so when the door opened, the beautiful Selene entered the room. She bowed and greeted His Highness Leandro. Leandro also greeted her and said that she must be very tired after the ritual. But the girl replied that not at all, she was fine. In fact, Selena was dressed very frankly and lightly. And when Millard saw it, he was very surprised. He couldn't believe that she was still wearing out-of-season clothes. He didn't understand if she couldn't see that it wasn't the middle of summer. And just as the man was getting closer to Selenia and was about to say something to her, Leandro came up to his friend, put his hand on his shoulder and said that it was a very cold time of year, and asked why she was dressed so summery in such cold and windy weather. The girl was surprised and, as if nothing had happened, asked, "Do they really think it's summertime?" Leandro smiled politely and said that yes. She had a very open sleeve and it was cold for that. Then he whispered in Millard's ear to hold back and not give up. But the boy at that moment took off his jacket and threw it at the girl. Then he added with pathos that it would be covered sooner rather than later. Selena, looking away, asked, "Does he dislike me so much that it's easier to cover the other to hide everything?" Her bare shoulders are attractive enough, actually. Millard got a little uncomfortable, but he still insisted and said it wasn't about that at all. Then they began to argue among themselves about who was right and who was wrong. Leandro could not stand it any longer and told the two of them to stop. Thinking that they were at it again, he then told the guy and the girl to have a seat. When everyone sat down at the table, Leonid told them that this reason he had decided to call the two of them was because he had a request for them. Even though Leandro is the emperor's illegitimate child, he was still born in the palace and raised as a prince all his life. So it was not a request, but rather an order from the prince himself. Leandro was silent for a while. He didn't even know how to break the news to the two of them without them killing each other and getting on his nerves. But soon he just directly said that the two of them should get married. And when Selena and Millard heard this, they were shocked for a while. And afterward they cried out in one voice, "Is he really saying get married?" Leandro smiled and said that they had gotten it right. In other words, it was just the two of them. And just when he was about to give the reason why it was all necessary, Millard interrupted him and said that he had passed in the royal family, and already he had managed to lose his mind. Yes, he would rather live a life of celibacy as a hermit for the rest of his days than marry this demoness. Selene said she would agree with him on that one after all, and His Highness continued his attempts to say what it was all for. Millard also said that he was willing to spend all day describing his reasons for not marrying her. Selene then turned to His Highness and asked him to say that it was only a joke, and at that moment an argument started again between the boy and the girl. Millard got angry because Selena interrupted him, and the girl said that if he was not interrupted, he would never finish talking about anything. But at that moment, Leandro couldn't take it anymore. He shouted at them both and told them to stop and let him explain. If they listened, they would understand at once. The boy and girl fell silent, and then Leandro explained to them that, as they both already knew, the king would soon be handing over the throne to the crown prince. Millard confirmed and said that this is something many people talk about among the aristocrats. But Leandro added that not only the two of them know very well that his mother is a commoner. Therefore, it's a great topic for gossip. Selene was surprised and asked, "Does he mean to say that for that reason the throne will be given to Andrew, inexperienced in his sympathies, rather than to him, the more talented Leander?" The thing is, Leandro is as good as Andrew. He's even better than that kid. Everyone in the Empire knows it. Millard thought about it and said that Selena was right about that. Andrew is not that smart in matters of politics. Yes, he doesn't have the confidence of kings either, but by the mere fact that he is the legitimate son of the king and queen, Andrew will win the trust of the aristocrats. They would still prefer to have a person on the throne who is easier to rule, so it is understandable in whose favor the aristocrats would make their choice. Leandra thought about it, and said that Millard was right about that after all. And there was a difference between him and Andrew. Leandro will only support a small number of aristocrats, so he hopes their families will support him in this difficult issue. With their ability to manipulate ice, they prevent a huge ice wall on the Eckhart estate from collapsing, which is exactly what the Stewart family is doing. And the Eckhart family, with their ability to control fire, light a fire to warm a particularly cold Stewart estate. His Highness said that if one could enlist the support of two families that occupied most of the kingdom and had the blessing of the goddess, then you can completely suppress all opposing nobility. At this point, Selina objected and said that in the Stewart family, she was the only one with the power of a goddess, and he himself knew that she was on his side, so she didn't think she needed to get married because of that. Leandro laughed and said that Selina, though he knows exactly how she feels, that she's on his side, that's for sure, but not her family, and she can't go against the will of her family in any way. At that moment, the girl thought about her horrible father, who is against all this. But then H went on to say that if Selina had the last name Eckhart, the family that supports him, then in that case, the head of the Stewart family, namely Lord Mothra, would not be able to do anything rash and make her do something undesirable, which is why they should get married. Millard looked at the girl and asked His Highness, "Is this really the only possible way in a situation like this?" Leandro replied that this was the safest and most efficient way, so he was willing to even beg them. He also added that it was necessary to create the perfect world they all dreamed of. Millard thought for a moment, and then he said that, in theory, their marriage contract would help him become king, but he didn't think it would make much difference anyway. Selina got up from the table and said something she hated to admit, but he was right after all. Her family's relationship won't change just because she marries Millard, so he can just forget about the whole thing. Then the girl went to the front door and said that she was coming back. But Leandro immediately said that he understood everything perfectly well and would not talk about marriage anymore. The man suggested she'd talk about something else, but Selina turned and said that if it wasn't something important, she was leaving. Leandro replied that of course it was important, for otherwise he would not have kept her. The girl sighed heavily, but she had to stay. When she started back to sit down at the table, His Highness said he hadn't expected them both to refuse so stubbornly, and I asked him why the two of them hate each other so much. He doesn't understand. Selina interjected in surprise. Does he really not know why? And afterward added, did he not know better than anyone else in this country how arrogant the Ehart family was? When Millard intervened and asked if she didn't think it would be worth looking at her own Stewart family properly, before looking at anyone else, Leandro intervened in their argument and said that it was certainly no secret that their families had been feuding for generations. But instead, he offered to reminisce about the times when they were very even good friends. Leandro said that when they were young they seemed to get along very well. When they were just kids, they didn't have arguments like they do now. Celine, hearing all this, screamed and told him not to remember, for it was a meaningless story. The girl, angry, started from the table and said that she was leaving. She was too tired from the ritual. She had also exhausted her nerves here, so she wanted to rest already. Then Millard replied that she should wait, for they were not finished yet. But the girl did not listen to him at all. She was intent and earnest. The boy empathized. He turned to His Highness and apologized, but said that he would excuse himself for a moment, and began to run after Selina. Leandro only smiled at this, and when he was left in the room all alone, he reflected. Some say Selina is a sharp character since she has to survive under the oppression of her father Margrave, and Millard only gets so irritable in the presence of a girl. Thinking about it, His Highness sighed heavily and threw his head back. He didn't know how to proceed. How can he convince these two people who can't even see each other? He wondered if they didn't realize that he only wanted their marriage for his own ends. He hadn't told them yet, but it was something his sweet couple needed to work out one thing together. That's why everything must be done quickly, as more and more reports of strange happenings have been coming in lately. As the sun was beginning to set outside, over the horizon, the baker came out of his room and addressed the children who were playing. He reprimanded them and told them it was getting evening. It was time for them to go home. The children immediately stopped and ran up to him, saying they wanted to play some more. But the baker asked if they were afraid that, if they were late, their mother would spank them. The girl tearfully replied that she was afraid, but she still didn't want to go. The baker insisted and said that their mother was waiting for them, so they should come back soon. The man's name was Fabian, and the children immediately said goodbye to him and told him they would see him tomorrow. The baker started to go about his business. Suddenly he heard someone's loud scream. The man was surprised and immediately turned around to see what it was. He stopped. Out of the darkness the sound grew louder and louder. It sounded like a growl or even a hiss, but it did not remind him of the sound of a beast, for it came from a human voice. Fabian stood in a stupor of terror. He did not know what to do. The man reflected on the fact that kidnappings had recently become more frequent, so they had introduced a law that people, especially children, were not allowed to roam the streets at night. Fabian wondered, did these jokers really want to go home so badly that they had decided to play a trick on old uncle? He said to the darkness that it wasn't funny, that they should come out now, or he would only scold them more. But as he walked in the direction of the outgoing sound, he thought he'd have to bring up the issue of alley cleaning at the next town meeting, because it smelled kinda weird. He walked farther and farther into the darkness and asked the children where they were. Fabian wondered if that was why he didn't need to go out at night. The baker then turned the corner and thought that the sound was coming from there. Then he saw a man standing in the dark with his hand against the wall. He immediately realized that someone was there. Fabian approached the man and told him that children were passing by, asking if he had seen them by chance. When the man said nothing to this, the baker added that he wanted to take them home before it was too dark and dangerous. But at that moment this stranger looked at him with his horrible eyes, which were turned in different directions, and roared with his blood-stained mouth. Fabian became nervous. He stuttered and asked why the man looked like that and if he was all right. But the stranger just kept growling and stepping closer to the man. Fabian was very frightened, and at that moment he saw his horrifying and dirty hand in front of his face. And then he screamed with all his might. At this moment, Celine was walking down the hallway of the manor and thought about her past, that carefree childhood when she was still friends with Millard. One day, when it was a sunny day, the children went outside for a walk. Selina walked ahead, holding a basket of food. Millard could not keep up with her in any way and told her to wait, but the girl replied that he was so slow. The boy asked where she was in such a hurry. Selina turned and replied that they were about to have a picnic after all. But then suddenly she didn't see the rock and accidentally twisted her foot. And then a bun fell out of her basket. The girl was a little upset when she saw it. She said she couldn't eat it now. Millard agreed with her and said that they couldn't, because it had been more than 5 seconds. And as they were about to leave, the guy called out to Selina and told her to look with her finger. He started pointing at the bun that had just fallen. He said that the ants immediately ran up to it. And indeed, a lot of ants started to come to the bun and take a piece of it and then go back to it. Millard said that it was very funny, and afterward asked them, "Since there is a lot of food, can we share a little with them?" Selina didn't like the idea very much. She sat down on the floor and started crushing ants with her hands. The guy, when he saw this, immediately panicked. He asked what she was doing. The girl replied that they were stealing their food after all. Like that. What was she doing? Millard approached her and said that they were just hungry and she could see it as charity. At that moment, Celine wondered how it was possible to share what was yours with someone else. Wouldn't that be a waste of food? The boy took another bun out of the basket and put it to the ants, saying they would keep this one and eat the rest. Selina didn't understand what he was doing after all. That bun was originally hers. Why should she have to share it with some ants? It occurred to her at that moment that you never know when you might starve to death, and she assumed that Millard must never have starved since he was throwing food around like that. Selina looked at him and thought that if she was as well off as he was, things would be different. But then the girl thought about what if she were Duke Eckhart's daughter, and they switched places. Then perhaps she too would be as generous and kind as he was, and would be able to help anyone. After thinking about it, Selina turned away from him and said that it had gotten kind of unfun outside, and she wanted to go back inside. Millard, when he heard this, was very surprised because of the reaction, because after all, they were going to have a picnic, and she's leaving like this. But still they walked back into the manor. The boy walked behind Selina and asked what they were going to do then. The girl suggested he play in the room. The boy agreed with her. But at that moment, Selena heard a familiar voice coming from the ajar door. Selena realized as she got closer that it was her father's voice, and thought that there must be an adult meeting going on. Celine's father had said that the Duke himself knew that the power their two families possessed made the precious Stuart estate the warm fire of Millard, and Celine's icy strength kept the ice wall from collapsing on the Eckhart estate. However, Celine is not perfect enough in handling this power, so there is a possibility that things will get out of control. Then the other said that he believed that his son, who had the opposite power, would be able to stop everything himself. Last time they got really scared when Celine lost her temper and almost ruined everything. However, Mauve told him not to worry. For this report, she's still too young, but she'll learn everything in the future. He also said that if their children continue to stay so close and friendly, perhaps they will be the ones to end the long-standing feud between their two families. Celine, having overheard their entire conversation, became very upset. She realized that her father and Duke Eckhart were both just using her. But at that moment, Millard came up to her. He wanted to comfort the girl, but she slapped him on the arm, and turning around, apologized, saying she didn't want to play with him anymore. Millard was left standing alone. His eyes filled with tears because he didn't understand why she had become so angry. But Celine had other things on her mind. The more she played with him, the more jealousy and envy devoured her. In fact, the closer they got, the more obvious it became that everyone was just taking advantage of her. So she didn't want to spend any more time with him. She really wanted to be just those people who said hello, and that was it. When she grew up and went to school, everyone whispered behind her back. Many people said about Selena that she was the Duke's illegitimate daughter, and nothing is known about her mother's background. She must be a commoner. Selena didn't understand if they weren't sick of having rumors like this about someone every year. But as soon as Millard appeared in the hall, everyone forgot about Selena and invited the guy to parties, complimented him. He was the center of their attention. Celine and Millard both wielding the power of a goddess, yet their attitudes are very different. Selena looks so unassuming against him, but at that moment the girl was interrupted from her memories from the past by Millard's voice. He ran after her and asked her to wait for him for a minute. But the girl wasn't going to stop. She just kept walking. At this point, the guy thought she was like always. Once her family's history came up and her character escalated from the other side. At that moment, the men who were standing nearby began to whisper. One of them called out to another and asked if these were the heirs of the Stuarts and Eckharts. The other one looked and asked. He too felt this cold atmosphere. Apparently, the relationship between the two families remained the same. The other told him that if it was the other way around, the two families became friends and joined forces, it would be a shocking blow to the entire kingdom. The man said that it must be true, but there was nothing to worry about now after all. Then one of the men raised his voice and said that there was such a rumor that the late Duke Eckhart and his wife were descended from the Stuart family. When Millard heard this, he was furious. He turned to him and wanted to ask what they were talking about. But Celine tugged on his sleeve and told him not to get angry. These people's words didn't affect anything and his actions wouldn't change anything. The boy thought for a moment and said that she was right after all. The girl went on to say that those words were His Highness Leandro's. She hopes he'll be cool with their decision. They did it because there was a reason, and nothing bad will come of it. At this moment, Millard took the girl's hand and said that, in fact, he was even willing to agree. But His Highness has chosen a truly reckless method of solving the problem. Marriage may be a valid method, but he is sure that there is another solution that would be more suitable. Celine, hearing his words, just stared at him. And afterward, Millard said that so be it, there would be no marriage. The girl smiled and said she was glad they agreed on something for once in their lives, and if he didn't need anything else, she would be leaving. And at that moment Celine pointed to her wagon and said that the coachman was already waiting for her. When Millard saw the carriage, he asked if she had really come to the palace in it. The girl said of course and asked what was the matter. But the boy didn't hear her anymore. He went to the wagon and opened the door. Selena, angry, asked what he was going to do. But the guy got a good look at the carriage inside, said it was in disrepair, and afterward added that she just didn't have a choice and said he'd be happy to give her a ride home. Selena really had no choice, so she drove to her house with the man she hated. Not long after they pulled away, the girl said he was crossing the line. No need to worry about her or feel sorry for her. Milord was surprised and asked what she was talking about. Does she think he's going to let her down just because he's sorry? The girl became even more serious and asked in that case what he cared, whether she would go home in a broken carriage or not. The man replied that she wasn't thinking about that at all. Selina has come to the royal palace, and she is the guest of honor of His Highness Leandro. And if she were to leave the royal palace in a broken carriage without a door, unwanted rumors would spread, so Prince Leandro would be embarrassed to let his guest go in such transport. The girl hesitated for a moment, then she turned away, looking out the window, and said that there was some logic to it. Milord took umbrage and said that there wasn't a bit of logic here, but completely everything was logical. Celine then replied that her family's estate was nevertheless far from the Eckhart estate, and asked if he was sure it was worth leading her that far. The guy explained that a friend of his lived nearby and he needed to meet him, so he was on his way, and he asked the girl to stop looking for some kind of trick. Selina asked in surprise, wondering if he was really a friend. And then she said that he was lying so brazenly, because he wasn't the type to keep in touch even with friends from the academy. My lord was surprised and asked how she would even know that. She didn't have any friends at all. She didn't want any. But Selina objected and asked what about graduation. Milord thought about it and said rightly so. She'd been so eager to say goodbye to him then, the only one she could call a true friend, so she'd gone to the prom for him. And then a very interesting suggestion came her way. The guy asked if she wanted to move to his place and have a drink there. When they remembered this, they immediately blushed. They felt very embarrassed about the situation. Selina immediately began to protest and said that it had never happened at all. Milord thought for a moment and replied that maybe he was just remembering wrong. But at that moment the carriage ran over a rock, and Celine, who was not holding herself up very well, began to fall. The boy shouted for her to be more careful, but at that moment he immediately picked up the girl, and they found themselves very close to each other. Selina's hand rested on his chest, and the girl thought he was so warm. Then the girl realized that it was really just like that day. Maybe that was the reason she didn't want to let him go, and afterward, Selina wondered what if she imagined it wouldn't have happened. And at that moment she immediately stepped away from him and took her seat, apologizing and saying that she had lost her balance a little. Milord was very uncomfortable with the situation, but he replied that it was okay. Selina didn't realize that it had just happened, and why she was shaking so much. She decided to forget all about that day and be done with it. The rest of the way, the boy and the girl drove in complete silence. They were each thinking about their own things. And so after a while, the wagon stopped in front of a beautiful mansion. Milord came out first and gave Celine's hand so she could get down. After that, the girl said that, whatever the reason was, thanks to him, she had no trouble getting there. The guy smiled back at her, then she thanked him again and told him she had to go now. But their sweet conversation was interrupted by someone's scream. It was the girl's father, of course. He went outside and started yelling at her. Milord, seeing Selina beside him, was surprised. He wondered what the hell was going on. He turned to Celine and shouted, asking where her carriage was and why she had gotten to the estate in Eckhart's carriage. The girl answered her father in a calm voice that she would explain everything, and when she was about to tell him, her father interrupted her and said that he didn't need any excuses. Let her go home already. Selina was about to start explaining the situation again, but her father swung his hand at her and asked if she was being disobedient, if she hadn't heard what he said. Let her go inside. And at that moment Milord stood in front of the girl and said that he was even surprised that Mofra had decided to come out and meet his daughter in person. But he got serious and said that the man just wanted to yell at her unnecessarily and even raised his hand. Milord continued to speak. He said the old broken carriage as transportation, raising his hand and shouting at his daughter. Somehow the relationship of the elders to their heirs of the Stuart family had deteriorated greatly. And afterward he said in a stern voice that he had drawn conclusions, turned around and added to Selina that he was leaving after saying goodbye to her. The father was about to say something, but Milord turned to the girl again and asked how long she was going to live like this. Is this what she really wants out of life? After all this time, isn't it time for her to start thinking? And in that moment, Selina really wondered if this was the life she wanted. It just couldn't be true. Mofra has always been like that. Everything he says can't be wrong a priori, but even so, he doesn't know everything. At this point, Selena's father turned to the coachman and asked if he was in charge of his daughter's carriage. The worker, his voice trembling with fear, replied that yes, he was the one. Mofra gripped his stick even harder and asked what he had done. This guy, why didn't he stop that insolent heart? And that's when Dad took a swing at poor coachman. But Selene shouted out at that moment, turning to her father and started activating her abilities to stop him. She used her ice to knock her father out of his hands and his cane to prevent him from hitting the employee. Mofra immediately started shouting at her, asking, wondering if she had used the goddess's Cecil on her. He asked maybe she'd lost her mind, but Selena asked him to stop because it wasn't Coachman's fault. On the contrary, her carriage was broken. He made sure it was repaired and sent back to them. And the final decision was made by Selena. He was not to blame for the situation at all. She also said that if he wants to scold her, he's welcome to. But it's not Coachman's fault. He shouldn't take out all his anger on him. He said she's a bastard because he raised her, fed and clothed her all the time. She's just an ungrateful wretch. Her father couldn't believe that she was expressing her gratitude to her precious father in this way with some threats. But Selena didn't answer him at that moment. Her father wondered if she was beginning to fully control her powers. She'd be damned. A half-breed born from the belly of a rabid, low-life idiot. She'd never be complete. That's what her father thought. He asked, "Does she still not realize who her little brother Neville is still alive because of?" Seeing her reaction, her father thought that here she was caught and asked if she knew how much money the medicine he was buying for him at the magic tower cost. If he stops taking the medication, he will die soon. He also added, "Has she completely forgotten about it?" At that moment, Selene bowed and apologized to her father. Mofra was immediately overjoyed. He said that he knew there was a shred of prudence left in her foolish head. "Already on my way back to the manor," he added, so she wouldn't talk about the unknown again. Otherwise a good relationship might not be waiting any longer. When her father walked into the manor, or else he thought Selene was just an idiot. How dare she even dare to rebel against him? If only brainwashing acted the population properly, everything would be great for them. And in that moment, he remembered how Selena had been brought to him. The woman had let the girl into the manor, told him she'd finally found his daughter. There were rumors in the village about a girl who uses the power of the goddess. Mofra looked at the girl and thought she was strange. Looking at her, it wasn't hard to realize that she had had a difficult life. The woman also added that as far as her family was concerned, all that was left was her mother and younger brother. He stepped closer to the girl and thought he could use her, make her do what he needed, treating her like a princess. He turned to Selena and asked how she was doing. After that, he apologized for not visiting. There was a lot to do, and he missed her very much. Selena was surprised and asked why. The man replied that it was because he was her father. After a while, when the girl began to settle down, her father decided to test her strength. Her father told her to try to concentrate better, but Selena couldn't do it. She didn't know how to do it, and it was very difficult. She looked at her father and said she was having a hard time. She wanted to go to her mom. She also missed her brother so much. Her father smiled and asked if she remembered what he had said. If she tried hard enough, he would bring them to live with him. And if she was already motivated, she could try again. Selena was upset. She said she didn't like it. She didn't want to do these things anymore. Mofra became angry. He said, "Is she beginning to be impertinent to him? And if she doesn't try hard, her mother will die." Selena was shocked. She asked, "Did he really trick her? But he promised to let me see her, didn't he?" Then Selena got angry. She said she couldn't see her mom yet because she was sick. But if she tried hard, she would definitely get better, and she would see her. And in that moment, that girl and the father were able to experience her powers. Mofra thought that this was the power of the goddess. She would finally be free to use it. But he didn't realize what it was, because the entire floor beneath them was icy. The workers began to survey the area and told the gentleman that the ice had spread all the way to the garden and the wizard had frozen to death. It was a huge disaster, and it was suggested that they seek help from the Eckharts. Her father turned to Selena, saying that since he would be helping her in the future, it was worth mentioning their previously mentioned deal. She must have misunderstood him. Her mother had fallen seriously ill and passed away, but he was currently doing his best to make sure Neville received all the medication she needed. The girl had grown up by then, and her father told her all the time that she should make an effort to help him. Selina sat on her bed and thought about everything that had happened to her that day and how she had hit her father with her power. The girl thought that it was simply catastrophic. The Duke said that the power she possesses is simply catastrophic. Yes, he's right. It is. Her power can kill. But it's not really about her. Her father sometimes ordered her to do terrible things. But at that moment, Anna came into her room. The girl was surprised and asked what she wanted. The maid replied that everything was fine. She was just being called by the gentleman right in that room right now. Selina, hearing this, was horrified, but then she calmly replied that she would pick it all up. Anna said in a worried voice that she looked so tired. Maybe ask him to reschedule everything for next time. But the girl, getting out of bed, replied that it was all right. She herself knows very well that no one in the manor can disobey her father. The next morning, when Selina was already awake, she saw Anna and asked, "Has she really decided to go that far?" The maid was sitting by the fireplace and said that it was not lit after all, and asked, "Why does it light for me? Has my lord's strength run out?" And afterward, she added that she had recently heard that Duke Eckhart had come to check on Miss Selina this morning. The girl was very surprised and asked, "Is it really today?" "It's much sooner than she expected." Anna also said that on this occasion the gentleman had a message for her. He would accompany her to Duke Eckhart that day, and the maid was asked to give it to her. Selina, when she heard this, was horrified and immediately asked what it meant. She stepped closer to the maid and asked, "Is she really being offered to be a Millard's escort?" "Father did indeed say so." Anna became nervous. She said more precisely, "He had a message from the palace. In addition, His Highness Leandro will join them at this ritual. In other words, he and Duke Eckhart will accompany His Highness Leandro." Selina, hearing this, was angry with Leandro. She thought he had set it up on purpose. At this point, the maid said that Miss had not had a good night's sleep and might be told by the gentleman that she was ill. Selina was silent for a while. After that, she said, "No, my father might listen to a request to stay, but Leandro never." And so after a while, Selina was already dressed and ready. She came to the place where she had been told. Leandro, when he saw the girl, was very surprised. He said he thought she wouldn't come, but Universe asked how she would have dared to do such a thing. "She can't possibly disobey a possible crown prince." The man smiled and said he didn't think she would ever be mature enough to obey his orders. And he added that it would be nice if she obeyed and was willing to honor his recent offer. But Selina said she couldn't stoop to such shame. At this point, she wondered if Leandro would have some goal he wished to accomplish. Then he rushes forward without noticing anyone around him until he accomplishes what he wants. Selina could say she was sick, so she wouldn't have to come. But then he and a billion others would have come to her bedroom under the pretext of visiting the sick. But at that moment, someone approached them, and the girl's musings were interrupted by a familiar voice that asked what they were talking about. It was my lord. He approached them and said that the ritual would begin soon. Then Leandro, seeing him, asked if he was ready. The man answered that he was. Selina started walking and suggested they hurry up and get started, because when the sun set on the Stewart estate, it was unbearably cold. Millard said that he didn't want to make his servants in the house shiver from the cold, but let her not rush him. And if they did, things could go wrong. The girl couldn't understand why he was having such a hard time concentrating, or if he was distracted by something. Then she thought about him stopping being so grumpy at every ceremony. She'd catch everything. But did he really have to act like a grumpy cat? The girl turned to His Highness and asked why he had decided to attend the ritual this time. He also had many things to do with the common people. Why is he here? But she also told him not to say that this was a matter on which the fate of a multitude of his subjects depended. At that moment, Leandro thought about Selina. She is the daughter of the Duke of Stewart. All the subjects of the manor must obey her. Even so, the Stewart servants answer to the Duke, not Selene. And there's a high probability that she's just an empty sound to them. But around Millard, she apparently doesn't want to show the difficult situation she's been in all her life. After thinking about it, Leandro said okay. The point was that he was doing her a favor, and she would have to repay it in the future. Selina was immediately outraged afterward. She said it was too much, and when it came to marriage to Millard. But he interrupted her and said they would not talk about it again. The subject of marriage is now off limits to them. Leandro smiled and said they agreed. The subject would not come up again. Selina looked at him and became very embarrassed. After all, that sweet and smiling face did not inspire confidence, and she asked if they were sure they wouldn't talk about marriage. Leandro replied that they would, and that it was time to start the ritual. Soon all the people dispersed. Leandro said that it had gotten too quiet when everyone left, and added that he could step aside while she talked to Millard. Celine told His Highness that apparently the subject he was broaching was off limits, but the man replied that he thought Millard was preparing to begin the ritual. Cillian. At the very center of the Stewart estate is a large pillar of fire that warms the entire area. Just as the Stewarts perform rituals to maintain Eckhart's ice wall, also perform a ritual near this tower to instill strength into Cillian. But this day was somehow different. All the time she'd been watching Millard, she'd noticed that he looked like he wasn't feeling well. She realized that if he continued like this, he would put himself in danger, and he needed to stop the ritual immediately. Leandro, when he heard this, was surprised and asked what he meant by needing to stop the ritual. The universe replied that she actually did, but thought that if she stopped the ritual midway through, every cell in his body will be in unbearable pain, and the sensations are incomparable to anything else. And if he continues the ritual, 1 billion could be completely consumed by that ill-fated fire. Selena thought that she couldn't let him die anyway, and so she began to think about what she should do. She turned to His Highness and said that she had figured out a way to deal with the problem. Leandro was surprised and asked what the method was. Selena answered that she needed to use her power for a little while, so don't let him be surprised. After a while, Selena began to wake up from the bright light that was shining in her eyes. When the girl opened her eyes, she didn't immediately realize where she was, but at that moment Leandro addressed her. His Highness said she had not had an easy time, but she had done a very good job. Selena replied that it was a job, nothing special. But the guy told her not to be modest. It was comparable to a feat. As she erected a huge wall, the girl interrupted him and said it was the only way to get rid of unwanted stares. And if everyone saw that the ritual had failed, word would spread, and the king would come to resent it. It took a lot of effort to get the billion out of the Cillian, and even though Celine had shrouded her entire body in ice, it was too hot in there. Leandro replied that that was probably why she was so tired, but he said he could let her always rest if she was doing him a favor. Selena irritably asks if they haven't decided everything. She asks to get off with these suggestions already, because she's very tired. Leandro replied that he could do her a favor and let her rest as long as she wished, but asked if it wasn't worth it to fulfill at least one request, considering he'd brought her there. The girl thought for a moment, and then she answered that perhaps she hadn't even thought it would turn out this way. His Highness said that Billion still hasn't woken up. The doctor's hands are splitting, and his fever keeps rising. So his request? He wants Celine to take care of him. He also said that he was sure Celine would be able to heal him because she has the power of a goddess, and the opposite power at that. Celine thought about the fact that with these hands of hers, she was freezing people to death and saving no one. After thinking about it, she told His Highness that she couldn't do it. Leandro was surprised, and then wondered if she meant to say she couldn't do it because she harbored special feelings for Millard, like love. The girl was angry with him about it. But then His Highness said that if not, let her take control of Millard's fever and heal him. It was his personal request and order. As Millard performed his duties while standing in the fire, he realized he was too hot, but didn't fully understand where he was. All he wanted at that moment was water. He would have liked a sip of water. The man felt as if all his blood was evaporating. He was hot and in maddening pain. But at that moment a light, cool breeze blew before his eyes, and he saw a small snowflake falling. Millard turned around and saw many snowflakes already. He immediately realized who it was and went towards them. As the man lay unconscious, he repeated this dream over and over again, but then suddenly he heard a familiar voice calling his name. The man started to wake up. When he opened his eyes, he did not immediately realize where he was, because the environment was unfamiliar. He immediately got out of bed and asked what had happened, for the last thing he remembered was the ritual in Cillian. He thought that the fire was stronger compared to before, so it was very difficult for him. Millard lost consciousness. He doesn't remember well what happened there. As he looked around, he realized that the room looked like a palace and wondered, had His Highness Leandro brought them there? But he is an ordinary man, and such are unable to withstand the full power and pressure of Cillian. At that moment he looked to the side and saw a girl who was asleep leaning on the tip of his bed. It was Celine. He didn't understand what she was doing here, and then he began to scrutinize her. The way she dressed and fancied herself always surprised him. Millard thought she was a girl in her prime, so why is she dressed like that? He then shifted his gaze upwards and saw various snowflakes begin to fall from the ceiling. He caught one of them, and afterwards he realized that he seemed to have been having a dream the whole time in which he was in a very hot place. He realized that Selena had probably helped him, and now he owed her. The man got up from the bed and took her in his arms. He then laid Selena down on the bed to rest properly and began to fix her facial hair that was getting right in her eyes. They were very close together, so close that Millard could even feel her restless breathing. But at that moment the door to the room opened and Leandro walked in. He turned to Selena and said that he thought he had figured out how to help Millard, and when Millard, who was shirtless and very close to Selene's lips, looked to the side, was very surprised to see His Highness. The man realized that this was not going to end well because Leandro was looking at him and smiling his devious smile. His Highness said he must have picked a bad time to stop by. Millard immediately rambled on, saying that he didn't know what he was thinking there, but it was all a misunderstanding. But Leandro apologized for disturbing him and said he'd be back later. The guy started shouting after him that he thought Selena's body was too cold, so he decided to check it out. At this time, Selene, who was lying on the bed and started to open her eyes, hearing Millard's voice, said his name. The guy immediately shifted his gaze to the girl. Selena finally woke up and saw that he was standing half naked right above her. She immediately started shoving him away. Millard started to defend himself, telling her to listen because it wasn't what she thought it was. The girl started to insult him. Selena was very angry. She said she'd saved his life, and this was his way of thanking her. Millard? That was starting to piss her off. He asked her to listen first, not to jump to conclusions. That's when Leandro entered their conversation, and he turned to the guy and told him that instead of clearing up this misunderstanding, he really thought he should get down from her. After the situation, everyone calmed down. After a while, they sat down at the dinner table, where there were many different delicious things already dressed. Leandro was very pleased with himself because he started proposing marriage again. However, the boy and girl said with one voice that they definitely wouldn't. His Highness was surprised and asked why, as the situation just now showed that they were close enough. Universe looked at him angrily, and then suggested that they discuss what had happened in the tower instead. They had to talk about the strange behavior of this force, and she asked indignantly why everything had finally come down to the fact that she and Millard had to get married again. At that moment, a butler came up to them with a bundle in his hand and told them to read. Selene, upon seeing it, immediately realized that it was a magical item called a Scroll of Silence. But she didn't understand what exactly he wanted to tell them by using him. That surprised her. And at that moment, a transparent dome appeared around them, which did not let in a single sound. Leandro immediately said that now the extra ears would not hear them. Then he decided to tell them the details of his request. The thing was that news had reached Leandro about the banquet in the magic tower. Millard was surprised and asked if he was confused by the overly conservative nature of the magic tower. His Highness said that he was right about that, but it seemed to have begun to change. Hitherto she has been inviolate in her conservative principles, but the strange thing is that she is this banquet held for the sake of prosperity and harmony. Delegations from each country have been invited, and the fun part is that each delegation must be a married couple. Even though this is the first time they are having a banquet and inviting someone over, they still decided to take such a step. Millard interrupted him and said that he thought he had already said he was ready to marry the population, and asked why focus on her. You should choose someone else. Anyone. Selena was offended by such a statement, so she immediately turned away from him. Then Leandro turned to the guy and said that he hoped he realized what nonsense he was talking about. After all, Millard is Duke Eckhart, one of the noblest families in the kingdom. The Eckhart family is considered one of the most noble, and few daughters of aristocrats are worthy to receive the title of his wife. However, the banquet in the Magic Tower will be held in 2 months. In other words, they need to decide on Millard Eckhart's companion in just 2 months. The guy said that even if time was running out and they had no worthy candidates at all, why did they need to focus on Selena and put so much pressure on her? Leandro asked him to calm down. because he hadn't taken all the necessary measures. If he really wanted to force them, they wouldn't even say a word to him. He said it was just his wish. He doesn't understand why he should look for another candidate when the two of them are perfect for living in happiness and unhappiness for the rest of their lives. For Andros smiled and asked, who else but him would be their mediator? Yes, and besides, it was not only his wish, it would be the best and easiest way. Selena wondered if he meant to say it was all about the banquet in the magic tower, and they couldn't get a quiet divorce after that. However, His Highness said there was no need to divorce. If they did everything right, and were willing themselves, he would make their marriage not exist, erase it very neatly. At this point, Celine thought about it and realized that Leander's method was quite effective, albeit very idiotic, but still. The magic tower is the closed territory of the great and secretive wizards. It is from there that her father gets the medicine that treats her younger brother Neville, which meant that they must have the recipe and the methodology for preparing the remedies needed for it. If only she knew them, Neville and she wouldn't have to suffer any longer. Oh, and if Selena finds out the recipe, she and he will be free of everything forever and can live happily ever after together. But at that moment the girl was interrupted from her musings by the voice of Millard, who asked her to say something. And then he turned to His Highness and asked him what the neatness was. But at that moment Selena replied that she had done it. The men were very surprised. They even thought they didn't hear her answer at first, because she had been so diligently refusing all this time. Celine then looked at her formerly nemesis and told him that they would marry. Millard was shocked. He asked if she was crazy, what kind of let's get married, what was she even saying? Selena replies that she's not crazy, or whatever he means, and don't let him yell at her. The girl doesn't understand what's stopping them from getting married, especially when you think about it and remember a moment. They should have done it a long time ago. The boy was surprised and asked what she meant by that. She opened the door to the room and told him to come in and they would talk and not yell. Let him in the hallway. After all, everyone will hear. They're actually in the palace. Millard was very angry, but still they went into the room, and then he told them to talk there, asking her what she was thinking when she talked about getting married. Selena said, seeming to think she had already explained it to him. Everything, even a fool would understand, but she would repeat it for him again. The girl turned to him and proposed marriage again. At that moment she looked insanely beautiful, and Millard seemed to be at a loss for words. After thinking it over for a moment, he asked why she had agreed so suddenly. The man added that at one point she had forced His Highness to put His Highness under a ban on topics near the marriage. Did she really feel that bad after dinner? Or was it all the effects of the ritual with Celine? However, Celine replied that it wasn't at all, and said that what happened a year ago during the Academy's graduation ceremony. Millard, however, irritably interrupted her and asked, did it make such a strong impression on her? Apparently he had missed that it was important after all. He thought they had forgotten about it, and it was over. Selena said she was the one who said it, and if he remembers, he said he was ready to take over. The girl moved closer to him, and Millard said he was only saying that because it was to his advantage. She made it clear then that she didn't want his responsibility at all. Selena said that was right. It was like that. But then, in the past, in that moment, she put her hand on his chest, and after that, she put her arms around his neck and offered to do it again. Millard was shocked. He didn't understand what she was doing, and at that moment Celine took and kissed him on the lips, telling him to take charge this time. The day they had their academy graduation, everyone was very excited, especially Millard. But when the guy walked away from his classmates, they were very surprised, because they hadn't burned him all the way down yet. Millard stepped outside and thought to himself, those bastards. They've been drinking hard liquor instead of water all their lives. He couldn't understand how they weren't as drunk as he was. He accidentally kicked the bottle, and thought to himself how he was going to enjoy his long-awaited prom if he was going to be in a state of incapacitation. And at that moment he looked at the bottle he had accidentally kicked and thought, where on earth would a wine bottle come from on the street? Then he looked to the side and saw Celine sitting in the gazebo. She smiled when she saw him. She had a bottle of alcohol in her hands, and there were many empty ones beside her. The girl, seeing him, said hello and asked, did he enjoy the banquet? She looked a little tired, and a blush appeared on her cheeks because of the alcohol. Millard stepped closer to her and asked, "Did she really drink all that alone?" The girl was indignant and asked, "Does he mean to say that she has no friends with whom she can have a drink?" But the guy was surprised and asked what kind of strange logic she had. She seemed to be very drunk and offered to take her to the hostel. Selina looked away from him and said that she didn't want to leave. And then she asked if he could sit with her for just a little while. Millard was shocked and thought, does she really want to go in on his tantrum and complain about life in such a drunken state? Then he said she was already too drunk, and she really should go to bed before she said and did something unnecessary. He said that if she kept drinking, she would get to the point where she couldn't make it to tomorrow's main ceremony. Selina asked in a subdued voice, "Does he really think she's going to come at her?" The guy was surprised and asked, "Well, why wouldn't she come? They're giving out diplomas too." Millard said their family would be there too, and it would be the last time she could see the friends she'd been studying with all this time. Selina was surprised to hear this and asked, "Does he really mean the Stewarts?" She then became more serious and said that those people were not her family, and she had no friends to say goodbye to. That's why she has no reason to come to tomorrow's ceremony. Millard was surprised to hear this. He even felt sorry for the girl. Selina started to get up and said that she really had to go now. After that, she asked if he would put all those bottles away. Without waiting for his answer, the girl got up from the table and started walking, if you could call it that. Her legs were shaking because she was too drunk. And those heels. Selina accidentally twisted her foot and started to fall, but Millard reacted in time to catch her. They were very close to each other, and the guy had his hand on her shoulder. Selina looked very beautiful this evening. Then he turned to the girl and asked if she would like to have a drink with him, but not in the gazebo, but in the room. The young men then moved into a room and drank many more bottles of wine. Selina looked at Millard and said that he was surprisingly drinking very badly. His face was so red right now. And it was really true. But the boy resented her and told her not to make fun of him. He thought at that moment that the last time they had a good conversation was when they were about 7 years old. Selina laughed and said that even Millard had his weaknesses. But then the boy got more serious and asked what she thought of him. Selina, because she was very drunk, could speak calmly, so she said he was everyone's favorite guy and of noble birth. But at that moment, Millard started looking at the girl and couldn't help himself. He said she had something on her face. Selina was surprised and asked, "What is it?" He moved closer to her and started wiping it off. They sat like that for a while. The boy had his hand on her cheek, and they looked at each other. After a while, the guy realized that he was holding his hand too long, so he immediately pulled it away. He blushed even more and apologized to her. But at that moment, Selina stepped closer to him and kissed him on the lips. He returned her kiss. After that, the girl began to take off his shirt. Millard, under the influence of alcohol, did not realize what was happening. But that's when Selina herself started to take off her clothes. When there was nothing left on them, the girl went up to him and told him to forget this day. In the morning, the boy's clothes were still lying on the floor untouched from the previous night. Millard woke up to the bright sun. When he looked at the bed, he didn't see the girl next to him, so he immediately started looking around the room for her. Selina was already fully dressed and about to head out the door. Then he turned to her and asked her where she was going so early. The girl coldly replied that she was going home. Millard was surprised. He asked, "Is she really not going to the main ceremony, going to go home?" If they started packing now, they would be quite on time. Selina asked what he was talking about. Millard was a little uncomfortable. This situation was embarrassing to him. But the guy said she was saying she had no business being there because her family wasn't family, no friends. And for what it's worth, he's willing to take responsibility for what happened. Selina was surprised and asked, "Does he really want to take responsibility?" Then she added, "So he wouldn't be a fool for at least one day. They were just drunk that night, and it's only an unintentional incident. They are both victims in this situation." Selina looked at him coldly and replied that she didn't want any responsibility. Millard was shocked. He said that he knew she hadn't been that drunk last night, and they both realized that she had wanted that too. However, the girl said that this was not true. Then he was surprised and asked, Does she really think that anyone could not have been in her place? The girl picked up her things and said that she thought so too. So she suggested that he pretend as if nothing had happened and move on with his life, forgetting about last night. Millard was silent for a while. He didn't understand what was going on or why she was reacting so keenly to it. But the girl had already come out when he wanted to say something to her. And at this point, when Selena openly started hitting on him, he was very surprised. He said that she'd said they'd just forget about this day, but the girl said that's why they would do it again. And when the guy was about to say something, she pushed him and told him not to do anything and just lie there and keep quiet. The guy fell straight onto the bed, and Selena stepped closer to him. He asked then, didn't she mention that anyone could have been in his place? And asked if maybe that day had really left some kind of imprint on her life. Selena became even more serious and said she wouldn't have believed it until it happened. Then she started to pull away from him and said that if he didn't want to do it, they wouldn't do it, and she would just walk away. But at that moment, Millard realized that he must not lose his chance. He immediately grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her down onto the bed. After that, he gave her a gentle kiss on the lips. Selena was a little surprised at the reaction, but it felt good. Millard started to kiss her neck gently and went lower and lower. Then Selena wanted to stop him and told him to wait. The guy asked in surprise why he had told them to do this, then gently touched her chin and said he would make sure she never forgot this evening.